Hi teachers, and welcome to a video explaining how to help teach the Context for Learning Math unit, Measuring for the Art Show. To get you started, I'm just going to tell you the materials you're going to need for teaching this unit. Now, to kick off with days 1 and 2, you're going to need quite a bit of preparation. Most of this is already ready for you, but let's go through it. You're going to need the big book, Measuring for the Art Show, that you can read. That's the storybook. You're going to need a copy of the recording sheet on Appendix B. That's super easy to print out and make. You need a bunch of Unifix cubes, lots and lots of them, sorted into bins with 2 colors, so groups can use just 2 colors at a time. Clipboards for student work is recommended so that they can move around and be on the tables or the floors when they're measuring. To start off this unit, I recommend giving each student a folder so that they can keep track of their work over the 10 days that you're teaching this. So just individual folders, math folders would work if you already have those in place, but any folder to keep their stuff in. Pre-cut posters, this is pretty time intensive, but Jenny is working on this as we speak over the summer, so these should already be made for you. Kids are going to work in partners on day 1, so if you want to choose their math partners in advance, you can plan that prior to starting the lesson. And then chart paper, you're going to, of course, talk about the work that you do as a group. You can use your whiteboard just to keep track of notes, but if you're the kind of teacher who wants to be able to refer back to your notes from one day or another, it can be handy to use chart paper for your group discussions. There are days where you will actually need chart paper, so it's sort of a handy thing to get, but you don't need it every single day. Now later on in the unit, days 3 through 10, you're going to need a couple other things, so I just listed some big ticket items, the things that will take a little bit of time, you have to make sure you have in advance, just so you don't get caught off guard. You're going to need adding machine paper. This is something that we should have. Karen should have it. I have some in my office. Strings of 100 connecting cubes strung together so you can put them up on your board. Some of you might remember that it's a little bit time intensive to get a piece of string through the cubes, but it shouldn't be terrible. I got new Unifix cubes, so that should help. You'll need strips of 10. This is just like an activity that the kids are going to do, but you need to make it in advance, so cutting out the strips of 10 and taping it together, just one for you as a demo, and then the kids will make those on their own. And then there's a game you'll play on day, I think, 7. So you need to copy the game cards onto cardstock and cut those out in advance of that lesson. Days 1 and 2 of this unit are super straightforward and super duper fun and engaging. So on day 1, you read the storybook out loud, and then students, after you're done reading the storybook, you explain to them that they're going to measure posters similar to in the story, and that's it. They go ahead and spend the rest of the period measuring the posters. Now, while they're measuring, you as a teacher are observing. Something that we're going to be able to work with is a recording sheet for observing notes about the kids. If you click on this link, I'm creating spreadsheets with sort of things to be looking for in your students while they're working. So if you look at this, when students are measuring, you might notice that one student is not aligning the cubes carefully to cover a span, like they're spaced out too much, or maybe they're incorrectly counting the corner cube. We'll talk about this in a moment. Or maybe you notice that one student is already using 5 and 10 structures to keep track of their groups. So on these documents, you'll be able to list your student names and make notes as they're working about where the kids are. Certainly on days 1 and 2, the point of this unit is not teaching to mastery. It's for them to note where the students are and to push them towards further along this progression. So this is a tool to help do that, and there will be other graphs like this for days later on in the unit. That's really it for day 1. You read the story, kids measure posters while you take notes. Day 2 begins with the math congress. So kids should be done measuring their posters on day 1. If they're not, that's okay. You can actually still start the math congress if they're mostly done, just to talk about the work that kids did do on day 1. And if they didn't finish, that's okay, because after the math congress, you're going to send the kids back to the posters to recheck their measurements. So at this time, if there's a group who missed one of the posters or didn't finish completely but still had a good start, they can finish their measurements during that time. Okay, So some details about what you're actually doing on day one. You're going to read the story. The story is about a child in second grade, which is awesome because you're in second grade, or first, depending on who's watching this. The teacher is Mrs. Washington. We have a Mrs. Washington at this school. You can mention that if you want, but she doesn't teach second grade right now. There are characters in the book. The kids who are measuring are Tamika, Sean, and Jalila. I would practice saying that out loud first so that we seem culturally competent. Jalila. That's someone's name. Kids might laugh, but it's a good teaching opportunity to talk about how people have different names, and we shouldn't laugh about things like that. The book mentions the word blueprint as one of the ways that we're going to create signs for these, so just sort of a noteworthy thing. They might not have heard that term before. When you read the book and you start giving them the task, you're going to draw this picture on the board. You're going to show that there's a rectangular poster or picture, and below it you're going to create a sign that's the same size. So that's something that you're going to model for them. Then they're going to get this worksheet, Appendix B, to go ahead and start measuring the posters that you have created for them, the different colored pieces of paper. So as they're measuring, the blue paper is short, is a small one. The yellow poster paper is gigantic, so there's going to be more copies of these and probably only one per class of the giant ones. Make some notes. Look for kids who are not aligning the tracks. What does that mean? That means they're like leaving gaps or overlaps with the cubes. So when you've taught measurement, those are terms that you've probably used before. Note kids who are building picture frames and miscounting the corner cube. They can, if they're connecting the two sides around the poster at the same time, either on the outside of the poster or the inside, there will be a cube in the corner. And make note of how they're counting that or keeping track of that. Make note of who's using colors to organize and keep tracks of amounts in any way. If they're counting by twos or counting by threes, that's interesting to note. And then make particular note of kids who are using 5 and 10 landmarks to keep track of their counting. Now, day 2 is going to start with your math congress. You're going to start by bringing kids together and asking them to share the measurements they've found so far. And you're going to record that on a chart in front of everyone. Don't talk about whether anyone's answers are right or wrong. They're likely going to be disagreements between kids who got different answers for the same measurement. So explain that today they're going to need to check any of the measurements that have disagreements. Once you have recorded everyone's numbers that they recorded, introduce the frame idea. That's this image here. Say that you saw some kids using this as a way to measure. If you didn't see kids doing this, say that you've seen it before in the past. Just bring this up no matter what. And talk about whether or not you should be counting this corner cube. Count this or not. And get kids to share their ideas on this. If they're getting confused or getting off track, bring it back to the context of making a sign. So really bring it back to, if you're counting this cube, how long would the sign be to go with this poster? Turn the paper around and ask the same question along the vertical side. Once you have that conversation, mention some of the other things that you noticed kids doing. If there are kids who aren't aligning their cubes correctly, mention that. Discuss that as one of the things that you need to be careful about when making your measurements to make sure you have the right number. Also bring attention to the use of color. If there were any groups who were using colors to keep track of their numbers, have those kids share what they were doing and try to structure that kids in a couple different ways. If someone was counting by twos, bring them up first. If someone was counting by fives, bring them up next. Then send the kids off to recheck their measurements, and as you circulate, encourage them to use the strategies you discussed during your congress. Then, before class ends, regroup to share their new measures. You want to make sure that at the end of the period today, you have agreed upon numbers. So if there are still disagreements, you can use the math congress to measure together. If you get together and you say, some kids still really think that the purple is 21 and others think it's 22. Bring a purple one to the group and measure it all together so that you can all agree on one answer before the period's over. You might notice that this investigation and this coming back might take some time, so it's a good reminder to keep the math congress as short as you possibly can, just in order to talk about the necessary ideas. All right, that's days 1 and 2. Looking forward to talking to you about day 3.